Here at TYT, we've been doing extensive coverage of the war crimes carried out by the Israelis in the Gaza Strip, in Lebanon, and in other parts of the Middle East. But one of the issues that's been difficult, really difficult to talk about, is the sexual abuse against Palestinians carried out by IDF soldiers in some of these Israeli prisons. Now, many of these Palestinians are detained and never charged with anything. And if they ever see a day in court, it's usually through military courts where they're better described as kangaroo courts. But while they are detained with no charges, oftentimes they suffer abuse, including sexual abuse. And we saw footage of several IDF soldiers sexually abusing a Palestinian man. That footage, that evidence was floating around the internet. And then we later find out that the IDF soldiers had all of their charges dropped against them after members of, the Israeli society started protesting the very notion that they would suffer any criminal charges for what they did. Then we start hearing this gaslighting about how you didn't see what you actually saw with your own two eyes. That's not what was shown in the video. If you've watched the video, that is what you see in the video. So here to explain how the charges got dropped, how this story got buried in Israel, is a wonderful person who I have a lot of respect for. His name is Ben-Ephraim. He was an IDF soldier himself, but has since become a bit of a whistleblower. He's a geopolitical analyst, and I welcome him on the show right now. Thank you for joining us, Shael.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I came across your post on X where you were detailing how that story, and more importantly, how those charges were dropped. Like, what was the pressure campaign behind the scenes? And I thought it was so enlightening. So I'm just gonna go to you right now and explain to us what happened after that video footage was released and everyone knew it was going on.
Yeah, so the judicial system in Israel thought that this was a very strong case. Because there was a complaint, there was physical evidence, there was a checkup by doctors, and all of that. We've since discovered that one of the reasons this complaint reached the judicial levels is because the guards there thought that the wounds had been inflicted by another Palestinian inmate. Once they learned that it was actually Israeli guards that did it, and that had been corroborated by the doctor they had sent this person to be checked by, there was panic in the Israeli system. And while the judicial arm continued to try to pursue it, the political and security arm tried to destroy it. Yisrael Katz came out and said that it was a blood libel. There were demonstrations against it. There was a pressure campaign to bury the charges from the defense minister and from the prime minister and from the chief of staff. The main prosecutor of the army was alarmed by this and tried to release the video to the media, which she did successfully. That's why you've seen it. It was not the policy of Israel to release that video. She did it on her own recognizance to Channel 12 in Israel. To my surprise, aired it. Then she was fired from her job for releasing that. There was an entire unclear episode where she threatened to commit suicide, left a suicide note. So it's unclear if she really wanted to commit suicide, if there were plans to kill her off. She was found before she could commit suicide. She's since disappeared in the sense that she's not talking to the public. She's supposedly alive and safe. And Netanyahu and the defense minister have since said that it's fantastic that the charges were dropped. They called the families of the accused and said that their sons are heroes. And that was the end of that. And this is one of the very few cases where there was even a minor investigation. Oh, and another thing, once the investigation started, the suspect who had been abused was released to Gaza so that he could not give any testimony. And that was the official reason that the investigation was dropped, because they had no one to give testimony. The Israeli authorities also tried to swap out the doctor's report for another doctor who was more sympathetic, who actually hadn't seen the individual because the individual was already gone. And he said that nothing had happened to him and he hadn't suffered any damage without seeing the patient. So we actually have two different medical reports out. One from a doctor who's seen him, who said that there was an attempt to rape him. And another from a doctor who said nothing happened to him, who hadn't seen him.
So before I go to you, Cenk, for a question, I just want to read what the Wall Street Journal had reported about this man's injuries. He had life-threatening injuries, including broken ribs, obvious signs of assault to the abdomen and chest, and a severe injury to the rectum, most likely caused by the insertion of a foreign object, one of the medical staffers said. It was pretty horrifying. It's just setting the bar so low that I don't know how we can deteriorate more morally. This is a medical staffer saying this about the Palestinian detainee. I was aware things like that could happen, but I've never witnessed anything like that. So I just wanted people to understand what was really going on. Go ahead, Cenk.
Yeah, so Shael, I want to talk to you about the different sectors of the Israeli government, society, et cetera, in a minute. But first, the obvious question. Once you very publicly release these guys who did the rape on tape, and it's not like people can't see it, they can see it with their own eyes. What do you think are the consequences of that? Is that basically a giant green light, a de facto way for the government to say, abuse the detainees in every imaginable and unimaginable ways, and there will be no consequences?
Yeah, there's absolutely no question about that. The Israeli government was alarmed that any of this came out to begin with. What they want is complete carte blanche for the guards to do whatever they want to the detainees. I know from talking to guards at Sde Teiman that this particular incident was not all that severe in relation to others. Like I said, it was a comedy of errors that led to the fact that this was released because they thought that it was another inmate who did it. Otherwise, they never would have released it. So all that Israel wants is to silence this as much as possible. And that, of course, means that guards are allowed to do this. And some of the guards who were involved have become celebrities. Some went on shows with their masks on, but some went without their masks on, and some have Instagram accounts that have been growing in popularity and talk all the time about killing Arabs and committing war crimes and how great it is. They become celebrities. It's incentivized to do these things. They are considered heroes. That very few people consider what they did to be wrong, because there's two schools of thought in Israel. One is they weren't doing anything, and the other is they're terrorists, so they deserve it.
Wow.
But either way, it's completely allowed. It's encouraged. The only thing we don't know is, are there orders coming in to do this? Like Christoph said in his article that he found no evidence that there's an order to do these things. We know for sure that no one is stopping it, which gives them an incentive. I wouldn't be surprised if there are orders coming in from somewhere. I mean, Ben-Gvir basically gave the order publicly to make their lives as terrible as possible. That's what he said. Detainees should be treated as badly as possible, but he didn't specify. So we don't know what the specifications are. But at the very least, they're allowing guards to do whatever they want to detainees.
Yeah, I just want to explain to the audience, there really is no functional difference between saying abuse these detainees and we will not punish you if you abuse these detainees. It's the same exact thing. So you could say, no, murder is technically illegal, but we're not going to punish anyone who does murder. Robbery is illegal, but we're not going to punish anyone who does robberies. You're going to have nonstop robberies. Same thing for rape, and in this case, this is literally rape. They say we will not punish anyone. In fact, we will celebrate the people who raped the detainees. And by the way, oh, they're terrorists, so they had it coming. No, tons and tons of the detainees are random hostages that the Israelis have picked up.
No one has it coming. Okay, even terrorists, no one has it coming. You don't get to rape people in prison because you consider them terrorists, or they are terrorists, or they are criminals. Like, it's wrong, period. It's wrong, it's wrong, it's wrong to abuse people like that.
And Ben-Gvir, of all people, should agree with that, since Ben-Gvir is a convicted terrorist supporter. So if he were to be imprisoned in Israel, according to the Israeli logic, he should be raped.
So I wanna get a better understanding of Israeli society, because we don't live in Israel, and I want to just understand the culture a little better, because you talk about how it's kind of bifurcated when it comes to the reaction or response to this particular incident. You have half of the people, you say, who acknowledge what happened and they justify it or they celebrate it, and you have these, alleged rapists being celebrated as celebrities, and then the other half are either pretending to be ignorant about it or are genuinely ignorant about it, think that it didn't happen at all. I know I said half-half, but it's probably not half-half. Like, what portion of society genuinely doesn't believe it, right? And if they did believe it, then they would be against it. Because I really need to know that. I want to know how many people, what percentage of Israeli society thinks that this kind of behavior is justified?
Yeah, it's very hard to answer that question because so many of the people who are saying that it didn't happen know that it happened. And that's why it's very difficult. I think I can speak for myself that when all these abuses started coming out, I didn't believe that they were real because I was conditioned to believe that Israel, well, it was a flawed country, but there were red lines that it wouldn't cross. I very quickly discovered that that was not true as more and more evidence came out. I think that a lot of Israelis knew before I did because they were involved in the army and the security forces, and those that weren't and knew later are already inundated by so many facts, but they are denying it for tactical reasons. So I would say the vast majority of Israelis think that the detainees did something wrong and deserve it, and think that even the ones that are picked up that they can't prove something are most likely terrorists. And even the ones who aren't terrorists, this is a deterrent to prevent them from doing October 7th again. I truly believe that the vast majority of Israelis in their hearts think that this is true. And I've heard some of my friends who vote Meretz and other parties, some of my close friends say, look, if they did it to people who did October 7th, it's not a big deal. And this is the left.
Wow.
And I've seen people on the right glorify it and say that that's what they deserve. So there's different shades of thinking that it's okay. There's some people who think it's regrettable, but that's what happens in jails. Like I've heard that. That's the most sort of left-wing thing I've heard from actual Zionists is, well, it's very bad that this happens, but every jail there's rapes and there's abuses. I've heard some Zionists say that. So that's the spectrum. There's different forms of justification, but the only people who are really against it tend to be anti-Zionists and Arabs. There's very few Zionists who are against it.
All right, so let's break it down a little bit more. Israeli society and government has a lot of different components. That you have the judiciary, that you have the cabinet, and the press. These are all different, right? So the government right now is as hard right wing as you could possibly get. There's not much dispute about that among rational people. But the judiciary often does well, not in regards to settlers or the IDF, where they just run total kangaroo military courts that are a total joke, or towards the Palestinians. But inside Israel, Ben-Gvir was convicted of supporting terrorism. There were real corruption charges against Netanyahu, and the Israeli court system before has worked. And the press sometimes gives us some of our best reporting on what's happened in Gaza, and far better than American press. Not all of it, but Haaretz and 972 and others. So, okay, so it felt, Shael, like there was some foothold for rationality and decency to make a comeback, right? Secularism to make a comeback in Israel. But it feels like that's getting, chipped away at every single day. And we might be at a critical moment here where we're past the tipping point. That's what we're worried about. What's your sense of that?
Yeah, you raised some very good points. There is a liberal Israel, or there was a liberal Israel based around parties like Meretz and Labor, based around the universities like Hebrew University. And the Supreme Court had a lot of justices that came out of that tradition, like Aaron Barak in particular is a notable judge of that school of thought that stressed the importance of human rights and secularism, mostly within Israel, like you said, and not so much in the territories, although occasionally in the territories. But even that very partial liberalism is dying. There's been a very concentrated attack on it. You might remember before October 7th, there were all these judicial reforms that there was an attempt to pass. And that was a targeted pinpoint attack at those elements of Israeli society. And then while at war, this extreme right-wing government has made very big inroads towards it. Now they're going to appoint one of their own as the Supreme Court justice, which is going to be a death knell to all that. And I've had friends who've attended some of these Supreme Court hearings, and members of Knesset go in there and intimidate them and yell at the justices if they dare say anything in favor of detainees or in favor of Palestinian rights, that they're terrorists and that this is why the Supreme Court needs to be dissolved. And there's protests in front of the houses of justices, sometimes threats on their lives. There's a real sense of intimidation on anyone who's liberal, and it's dragging the courts more and more to the right. They're essentially becoming rubber stamps of the government. And as the government puts in more and more right-wing justices, that's only going to continue. So that kind of liberal element of the Israeli judicial system is eroding and will probably die. And the changes in the demographics in Israel are going to exacerbate that process even more.
I was going to ask you about that because I mean, a few weeks ago, I was flying home from a trip I was on, and there were two people, a couple, sitting right in front of me, and they turned around and thanked me for the work I do. I was like, oh, thank you, thank you. And then they said they're Israeli, and I was kind of shocked. But I think that they're probably Israelis who left Israel because there has been, just based on anecdotal evidence, I might be wrong, that's why I'm asking you. It appears that there's been almost like a flight of, the types of people who think the way we think, that would see a rape on camera and find it like shockingly immoral and would want consequences for it. So would you say that that a lot of Israelis since October 7th have left Israel, and those tend to be people who have political views more in line with decency?
Yes, there's been a brain drain from Israel of the most educated people with PhDs, high tech, doctors, people like that, who it's easy for them to leave the country and do well. They tend to be, not always, but disproportionately liberal. A lot of them left before October 7th. There's always been a big community of people like that here in California, where I am, and in New York, and in Berlin, there's a big community. But since October 7th, that has increased. There's very few people I know with opinions similar to mine who think that Israel has a future. Some of them stay for various reasons, relatives, or they're not used to it, or they're English or whatever. But there's been a turning point in the last year or two where very few people think that the future is going to be good. Because not only are there all these elements of fascism rising the same way we see in the United States, but unlike the United States, there's a sense of hopeless demography behind it. When liberal elites are leaving and the ultra-Orthodox and the settlers are having more children, that ultimately leads to a deep change in the fabric of the country. And those who are younger, who would be maybe liberal in the past, are going through an education system that's very nationalist and very extreme. So if you look at the polls of young voters, they're much more right-wing than the older voters are. And the older voters are pretty right-wing. So we're really looking at a situation that a lot of liberal Israelis consider to be hopeless. And so a lot of liberal Israelis like myself are moving towards more anti-Zionism. And a lot of them are thinking about how to leave the country if they haven't left already.
So let me follow up on that. How much do liberal Jews in Israel feel pressure? Like, it reminds me of other genocides where, the good Germans, the good Turks, whoever they might be, the good Serbs, would be shunned or shamed or imprisoned or in other ways outcast. Is that happening in Israel?
Well, traditionally, there's a surprising amount of tolerance towards the Israeli left. There used to be demonstrations, newspapers, parties. They were seen as traitors or nut jobs, but there wasn't a lot of violence towards them and that sort of thing. That's changing. Now, people who go to anti-war demonstrations or even anti-Netanyahu demonstrations receive death threats and are feeling increasingly uncomfortable. They're getting beaten up by the police. Occasionally, they're being arrested for what they post on social media. This is just starting. It's just starting because this is not the traditional Israeli way. The traditional Israeli way is if you're a Jew, you can have sort of whatever opinion you want. But that's really changing. It's nowhere near as bad as it's been in other genocides yet, but that's a matter of time. I think that this current government still has remnants of the old approach. Netanyahu was an Israeli born in 1948. But people like Ben-Gvir, whom I believe will end up being prime minister, or someone like him will end up being prime minister, are going to crack down on freedom of speech. So this is a process that's starting for Jews as well. We're seeing attacks also on those that go to the territories to help protect Palestinians. But usually if you're sitting at home expressing your opinion, it's not so bad, but that's starting to change.
So last two things here. To give us a sense of what percentages, and again, I know these are rough, right? Are of Israelis these days are religious fundamentalists. What percentage are just nationalists, like Zionists, secular, but Israel above all, right? And then what percentage are what we would traditionally call liberal left, care about human rights, hey, maybe two-state solution, that type of thing?
Well, I'm going to look at the Jewish population because the Arab population doesn't really fall into those categories.
Yep.
It falls into completely different categories. So among the Jews, I would say somewhere between 30 and 40% are religious enough that it really influences their political outlook, and that's going to rise to 50% within the next few years. They combine the borders are very porous between them and the nationalist Zionists, who the typical Zionist puts security first above all, and that includes some of the religious people. That's probably about, I don't know, 50, 60%. And then actual liberal people who have liberal ideals also towards the Palestinians are 10%, something like that. Now, there's more people than that who think that they're liberal because they believe in a more secular, tolerant country inside Israel. And they don't like Ben-Gvir and they don't like Netanyahu. But a lot of them really don't care what happens to the Palestinians. That's an increasing amount of the people who vote against Netanyahu and demonstrate against Netanyahu really don't care what happens in Gaza and what happens in the West Bank.
Yeah.
So those who actually care are 10% and probably dropping.
So last question is about the diaspora, because it feels like a lot of the Jews across the world who support Israel have been taught that that's part of their identity and it's important and all Jews are going to be killed if it's not for Israel, etc. But I think that they still have a romanticized version of Israel in their head, where kibbutz and we go and Tel Aviv is nice and it's wonderfully moral and relatively liberal and a westernized democracy and etc. And they don't have any sense of how radical, religious, and right-wing Israel has gotten. But I'm just guessing. So that's why I'm asking you. So do you think that's relatively right? And is that causing a huge problem because they're accidentally enabling the worst right-wing instincts of the current government and society of Israel?
There's some of that ignorance, but I think a lot of it is just cognitive dissonance. Everyone sees what Israel's doing. Everyone sees what the Israeli election results are, what the policies are. Maybe they don't know the exact demographics, but they get a sense. It's true that if you visit Tel Aviv, you don't really understand what's happening in Israel. Not that Tel Aviv is that liberal, but compared to the rest of the country, it's super liberal. But I think that for a lot of American Jews, Israel has become such an important part of their identity that they feel they have to grasp at every single straw in order to defend it, even as it becomes increasingly indefensible. And the older you are, the more you're invested in Israel and in the need to defend it. And we're seeing younger Jews with a lot less skin in that game and a lot less of the sunk cost issue regarding Israel, and they're much more willing to accept. So I don't think it's really a lack of information per se, as much as it's an issue of cognitive dissonance, because the amount of information that we've received about Israel doing bad things, even before October 7th, but now, every day something shocking comes out that really should make you question your support for Israel. And I look at the people defending Israel and I almost feel pity for them. It's like, how can you defend this? And every day it's a new PR crisis. And every day they're trying desperately, but that's because it's part of their identity. I don't know if they really believe that Israel is that just anymore. They do believe that Israel is being targeted disproportionately because of anti-Semitism. That's a genuine belief most Jews have, which I don't have. But they know that Israel is not that righteous and moral anymore. I think that's a very hard case to make now.
Shael, I just want to say thank you for the courageous work you do, because I mean, I'm not a Jewish person and I can't imagine what it's like to be a Jewish person who is very critical of what Israel is doing right now. I mean, I get a lot of crazy threats, so I can't imagine what you've been through. But also thank you for breaking free from the shackles of delusion where you find yourself defending the indefensible. I'm so happy that you're not not doing that. And you're providing an example of, Israelis, Jewish people who have been speaking out against this. These people do exist. There might be a smaller population of them in Israel right now, but I know so many Jewish people who have been standing up and calling out the injustices, and you are one of the loudest voices. So thank you again, and I hope you'll come back soon.
Anytime, it was a pleasure, and thank you for your kind words, and I love the work you two do.
Thank you.
And I'll add one last thing. Shael, thank you for keeping the moral light of Judaism alive. I think that people will come back later in your community and thank you and others like you for representing true Judaism and not getting wrapped up in the moment, because nationalism is about hysteria and people get sucked into it. But you didn't, you stuck with true principles, and we appreciate it, brother.
I sure hope you're right. Thank you so much for having me. Have a wonderful day.
You too.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.